It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The thick, pulsing kind that tells you something's about to snap. I was sitting on the front porch of our little house on the edge of Knoxville, watching the sky turn that burnt orange Tennessee does so well. It should have been a good evening. Cool breeze, glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, the smell of cut grass still lingering in the air. But the quiet wasn't restful. It was heavy. Inside, the radio was low, muttering something about economic collapse and another bad week for the stock market. Didn't matter. I'd stopped caring about Wall Street when I started counting coins at the gas pump just to fill half a tank. Things have been hard lately, harder than I let on. I've been stretching paychecks like they were rubber bands, praying they wouldn't snap. Jenna and I had been fighting more than talking. And even when we did talk, it was mostly logistics, bills, groceries, who forgot to pay what. So when I heard the sound of her heels, those high, sharp stilettos she usually saved for galas or funerals, I knew something was coming. They clicked with precision as she climbed the front steps, each one landing like a judge's gavel. She stepped into the light like she belonged on a magazine cover. Her hair was perfect, curled at the ends. She wore a tight coffee-colored dress that looked expensive, too expensive for a woman who claimed we were barely scraping by. Gold earrings, subtle makeup, and that perfume she only ever wore when she needed something. I'd married her for her fire, her ambition, her intensity, but right now, that fire felt like it was about to burn me alive. "Jack," she said, standing with her arms folded across her chest. That tone, half practiced, half performed. She'd rehearsed this. I didn't say anything. Just sipped my tea, eyes on hers. She avoided mine. "I've been thinking," she began, like she was easing into a conversation about dinner plans. "We need to be realistic about where we're headed." I nodded slowly. "All right." She blinked, surprised I wasn't interrupting. "I met someone," she said. There was the moment where the ground shifts beneath your feet, even when you knew the quake was coming. But I didn't flinch. I'd already suspected. He's well-connected, wealthy, older, not emotional, she added quickly, as if that somehow made it better. "He's interested in me, and he could help us." "Help us," I repeated, more to myself than her. He offered support. Financial, investments, opportunities. He has friends in the right places. He can get you into rooms you've never been in before, Jack. It's not love. It's business. "And what's your part?" I asked, voice even. Her lips tightened. "I go to dinners. I entertain him. I wear the dress, smile at the jokes. I play the part. That's all. That's all." Like dignity was a subscription you could cancel. "I wouldn't be sleeping with him," she added quickly, though her eyes flickered, just for a second. "At least not now. That's not what this is about. It's a stepping stone." I didn't answer right away. Just leaned back in the chair, watching the sky go from orange to dusky purple. The breeze picked up, brushing against us like the only honest thing left on that porch. "You don't have to say anything," she said finally. "I've made up my mind. I'm doing this. For us." I looked at her then, really looked. She was nervous, not because she thought I'd stop her, but because she thought I might fall apart. That I'd beg, or cry, or rage. But I didn't. "All right," I said, calm as still water. She blinked again. "All right, you've made up your mind. What else is there to say?" A pause. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say more, explain, justify, maybe even backpedal. But she didn't. She turned, heels clicking against the wood, and walked back down the stairs to her car. She didn't look back. The moment she drove off, taillights fading down the gravel road, I stepped inside. Past our wedding photo on the wall. Past the empty kitchen where she'd once made pancakes at midnight. Into the garage, where I kept the burner phone hidden inside an old toolbox behind some rusted wrenches and a cracked flashlight. I unlocked it, thumbed through 2 texts, and sent one message. Green light. Seconds later, the reply came. Copy. That was all I needed. I'd known for weeks. The late nights, the changed passwords, the credit card charges from places she had no business being. I'd tracked her. I'd watched her. Hell, I even knew the guy's name before she told me there was someone. She thought she was ahead of the game. She didn't know she was playing mine. And I'd already dealt the opening move. The night Jenna broke the news to me, she drove off thinking she'd just taken control of our future. That was her first mistake. thinking she still had the wheel. The truth? I've been tracking her for over a month by then. Not obsessively, methodically. It started with a gut feeling, the kind that gnaws at you when something's off. I wasn't looking to catch her doing anything. I just needed to know. So I paid attention. Really paid attention. She'd started leaving the house in the middle of the day, wearing clothes she used to save for date nights. New perfume. Fresh nails. A different kind of urgency in her walk. At first, I tried to write it off. We'd been distant. She was probably just trying to feel good about herself. But then came the lies. She told me she was meeting a friend from college in Chattanooga for lunch. Said her friend was in town for a conference. I didn't question it out loud, but I made a note. 2 days later, I checked our credit card account. No charge in Chattanooga, but there was one at a boutique hotel in Lafayette. Not for a room, just a bar. That same day, I installed a location tracker on her car. Simple tech. Clean. Invisible. She didn't have a clue. What I saw over the next few weeks broke something in me. She wasn't just flirting with a new life. She was rehearsing for it. Hotel bars, rooftop lounges, short trips out of town, she explained away with vague networking gigs. And then the names started popping up in her texts. Names I didn't recognize, but one kept showing up more than the rest. Vincent. He was older, mid-50s, ex-military turned private investor. I found his Instagram first, then his business site, then a few interviews. He looked like every cliché of success. Silver hair, boat photos, tailored suits. The kind of man who drinks whiskey that costs more than my truck note. He ran a firm in Austin and owned a vineyard outside the city. He also had a habit of chasing younger women with ambition and just enough desperation to overlook his teeth-gritting arrogance. Jenna fit the profile perfectly. I could have confronted her then, thrown the evidence in her face, watched her scramble to spin it into something innocent. But I didn't want her to just admit it. I wanted her to choose it, to sell me out without knowing she was being watched. That was the only way to be sure. So I called Jude. Jude was an old friend from my college days. Theater major turned commercial actor. Could cry on cue, sell anything with a half smile, and disappear into a character like he was made of smoke. I told him what I needed: charm, polish, and just enough mystery to make a woman like Jenna lean in. We spent hours going over the script. Not a literal one. This wasn't Broadway. But beats, details, how to speak like he'd made his money on wine and international real estate. How to talk just enough about politics without sounding like a politician. How to flatter without fawning. We even built a backstory. Divorced, no kids, lonely enough to chase a second chance, but proud enough to pretend it wasn't desperation. I told him what Jenna liked, her favorite type of wine, dry red, how she felt insecure about coming from a small town, the way she lit up when someone used the word potential to describe her. Jude absorbed it all like a sponge. We picked the town of Benji for the setting. Small, quiet, upscale enough to host the illusion, but not big enough to draw unwanted attention. The restaurant was called Allura, perched on a hill overlooking a lake. Intimate booths. Candlelight. Tablecloths starched so tight they could crack. I paid the manager under the table to wire a booth with audio and a discreet video feed. He didn't ask questions. I think he thought it was a marriage proposal. I let him believe it. The plan was simple. Jude would accidentally meet Jenna through a business contact at a wine tasting event. She'd be told he was scouting someone to consult on a new vineyard rebranding campaign. Jenna's background in marketing would make her a perfect mark. And sure enough, 2 days after the event, she came home glowing. "I met someone interesting," she said casually, swirling a glass of wine in her hand like she was already in character. "He's thinking about bringing me on for a side project. Might be a big opportunity." I nodded like I hadn't heard that same rehearsed excitement before. "Sounds promising." He invited me to dinner. Just a business thing. "Of course," I said, barely hiding my smile. "You should go. Never know where something like that might lead." She blinked, a little thrown by how supportive I sounded. But she recovered quickly, already picturing her new chapter. That was her second mistake. She thought she was climbing out a hole. She didn't realize I was the one holding the ladder. It was the kind of night that made promises it had no intention of keeping. The air was warm but carried a bite under the surface, like it knew something was coming. I parked across the street from the restaurant in Benji, just far enough into the shadows to be invisible. My truck blended in next to a row of trees, a borrowed ball cap pulled low over my brow. From there, I had the perfect view of the entrance to Allura. I watched her step out of the boutique hotel across the road, like she was walking onto a movie set. Silver dress, low cut, tight around the waist, heels like a cracked bone, and a look in her eye like she already knew this was going to be the night that changed her life. Her hair caught the porch light as she adjusted her clutch, lips pressed tight. Not nervous, just focused. She never looked back. Not once. She crossed the street and walked straight through the doors of Allura. I checked my phone. Jude had texted, "Seated. Show starts in 5." I turned up the volume on the feed, just enough to hear through the earbuds. The mic picked up everything, clinking glassware, hushed conversations from the nearby tables, and then, finally, her voice. "Vincent," she said, her tone warm, smooth. "This place is gorgeous. You deserve nothing less," Jude replied. His voice was perfect, low, confident, worldly. Just enough southern drawl to make it feel familiar, not enough to sound local. When I find something or someone I value, I don't cut corners. She laughed. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. But I kept listening. The waiter came and went. Orders were placed. She chose a red blend, something from Napa she claimed to have had before. She was performing, and she was good at it. But Jude was better. He led the conversation like a conductor. Talked about his properties overseas, a new investment in Portugal, a winery that needed a full rebrand. She was all in, pitching herself without even realizing it. She touched his arm twice. Once when she laughed, again when she made a joke about needing an excuse to finally leave Tennessee. Then came the personal shift. "You ever feel like you're meant for more?" she asked, swirling her wine like a woman on the edge of a decision. "Like you've been playing small your whole life?" "All the time," Jude said, leaning in just the right amount. "That's why I stopped waiting. Started building. Life's too short to stay in places that keep you small." She nodded. Exactly. The way she looked at him, like he held the door to everything she thought she was owed, it made me sick and fascinated all at once. She wasn't just playing the role. She believed it now. Believed this man across from her was her ticket out. And that's when he pulled out the velvet box. Smooth, black, just understated enough to look real. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. Her breath caught. "What's this?" "An advance," Jude said. "Call it a token of commitment." She opened the box slowly. Inside was the necklace, silver, minimalist, a small emerald at the center. Just expensive enough to impress, just simple enough not to set off alarm bells. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. She actually gasped. That's when Jude asked the question. It was planted, scripted. We'd gone over it a dozen times. "If you take that necklace, it means you're ready to leave your past behind. No strings, no looking back. Are you?" She hesitated. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, the weight of it all would hit her. But then she smiled and said, "I've been ready for a long time." That was it. The confirmation, the proof, the cut. Jude nodded, his job done. He signaled the waiter and said something about dessert. She was glowing, radiant. She thought she'd just sealed the deal on a new life. She had no idea she'd just signed her exit. Back in the truck, I sat frozen for a second, letting it settle in. My jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Part of me wanted to storm inside, rip the necklace out of her hands and throw it back at her. But I didn't, because this wasn't the finale. This was still the middle of the play. I turned off the audio, pulled the cap down over my eyes, and started the engine. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the restaurant. I didn't need to. She'd shown me who she was. And now, she was walking straight into the ending I'd written for her. She came home like nothing happened. Late, of course. It was a little after midnight, and I was sitting in the dark living room, the soft blue glow of my phone screen lighting up my face. Outside, the crickets were still chirping, unaware that everything inside this house was about to crack in half. I didn't move when the door opened, just listened. First, the quiet click of the lock, then the soft sigh she always let out when she thought no one was awake. Her heels tapped against the wood floor like distant thunder. She paused in the foyer. I could picture her scanning the room, seeing me sitting there in the shadows. "Hey," she said, casual but cautious. "Didn't think you'd be up." Her dress was wrinkled now, her lipstick faded. She looked used, not in a cruel way, just like someone who had bet everything on a version of herself that didn't quite cash out. I didn't say a word, just let her stand there in the thick, humming silence. I ended up grabbing dinner with a few people from the event, she added, towing off her shoes. Sorry it went late. I didn't think. Lafayette, I said, cutting her off. She froze. What? Lafayette. The bar at the Marlowe Hotel. You were there 2 Fridays ago. She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly. She was stalling, calculating. You told me you were in Chattanooga, that your college friend was in town. Her arms folded, defensive. Okay, Jack, what is this? I know everything, Jenna. I reached over to the coffee table and picked up the folder I prepared. Thick, neatly organized. I handed it to her without ceremony. Start with the photos. She hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, she flipped it open. First page, a grainy still from the Lafayette Hotel camera. Her in that red coat she said she gave away last winter, stepping out of Vincent's black Audi. Second page, a screenshot of a message. Her texting a contact saved as S. The message read, I think he suspects, but I can handle it. Third page, a still from the dinner. Her hand on Jude's wrist. The necklace. Her smiling like the world was finally bending in her favor. Then came a transcript. Her words. Her voice. I've been ready for a long time. She stopped turning pages. Jack, don't, I said, calm as a still pond. Don't insult me with the act. Not now. Her face crumpled. Panic, shame, confusion, all of it bleeding together. I didn't mean to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to go this far. You thought I'd just accept it, I said. Thought I was so desperate, so beat down by our money problems that I'd nod along while you auctioned off your dignity. And mine. Tears started. Of course they did. She was good at those. The chin tremble, the stifled breath, the slow collapse into guilt. It used to work. Not anymore. This wasn't about desperation, I added. It was about ambition. You saw a shortcut, and you took it. You thought he was the way out. He said he could help us, she whispered, voice breaking. No, Jenna. He said he could help you. And you believed him. She started pacing, mumbling apologies, reaching for reasons. Childhood trauma. Bad timing. The economy. Everything but what it really was, a choice. I waited until she burned out, then pulled the divorce papers from the second folder. I'd signed them 2 days ago. She stopped cold when I laid them in front of her. Her voice cracked. Jack, no. Don't do this. We can come back from this. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Jenna. You can't come back from this. I already did. She sank into the chair, eyes wide, lips trembling. You don't mean that. I didn't respond. I made a mistake. No, I said, standing. You made a decision. Repeatedly. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. She stared down at the papers like they were a bomb she didn't know how to defuse. She hesitated, hands hovering, tears dripping onto the ink. Then she signed, and just like that, it was done. I picked up the papers and walked away without another word. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed that had once been ours and stared at the wall. Not sad, not even angry anymore. Just still, quiet. That was the thing no one tells you about betrayal. The rage doesn't last. The heartbreak doesn't either. What stays? The clarity. She thought she was the one playing a role. She never realized she was just reading lines I wrote. I walked out of that house like it was the final scene in a movie. No shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic rainstorm. Just me, a packed duffel bag, and a sense of stillness I hadn't felt in months. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. She was still sitting at the kitchen table when I left, head in her hands, the divorce papers signed and sealed between us. That silver necklace she'd clutched like it meant something. It was on the floor, forgotten. Probably still there. She'd gone all in on a fantasy and lost everything real in the process. I got in my truck, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. The radio clicked on, mid-song, some old Springsteen track about second chances and lost roads. I let it play. The night air was cool and clean, brushing through the open windows as I pulled out of the driveway for the last time. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen, a message from my lawyer. Filed. She'll be served officially by Monday. Clean break. I smiled. It was a bitter smile, but it was real. The plan had worked. Not because I'd caught her, not because I'd outplayed her, but because I'd stayed quiet long enough to let her expose herself. That's the thing about people like Jenna. They think they're playing chess when really they're just knocking pieces off the board and hoping no one calls checkmate. I checked into a roadside motel on the edge of town. Cheap but clean. The clerk barely looked up when I handed him my ID. Room 12. Key card. Done. Inside, I tossed the bag on the bed, kicked off my boots, and sat by the window with a bottle of bourbon I'd picked up on the way. Not celebrating. Not exactly. Just closing a chapter. Outside, the highway stretched in both directions, taillights blinking like stars. Somewhere past those hills was the version of me I used to be, the man who thought love and effort were enough to hold something together, who ignored the red flags because the memories were still good, who let his own needs get buried under the weight of someone else's ambition. That man was gone now, and the one sitting here, he wasn't angry anymore, just clear. I picked up my phone and did the final cleanup. Deleted her number. Every message. Every photo. The contact for Jude, too. He'd done his job, and he didn't need to be in this story any longer. I even deleted the audio file from the restaurant. I didn't need to listen to it again. I already knew every word by heart. The next morning, I found a coffee shop down the road, sat at a table by the window, and started sketching out a plan. Maybe I'd head east, find a place near the water. A cabin. Some space. Or maybe take a road trip. No deadlines. No destination. Just me and the road. I wasn't running. I was reclaiming. And if Jenna ever told the story, I'm sure she'd leave out the part where she got played. She'd say I overreacted, that she was trying to save us, that she was confused, pressured, tired. She'd rewrite the whole thing to make herself the tragic figure. People like her always do. But I didn't care. She could spin her web in someone else's corner. As for me, I left the ring on the dresser before I left the motel. Not for her. For myself. A symbol of what was broken. When I survived, by the time I merged onto the interstate, the sun was rising, cutting through the morning mist like a promise. My truck hummed steady beneath me, the road wide open ahead. I didn't have a destination. Didn't need one. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't chasing or being chased. I was free. She thought I was weak. She thought I'd stay. She thought I didn't know. But I had known all along. And in the end, I didn't just walk away. I walked away with everything that mattered.